Okay, everyone, let's get seated so we can begin second half of the Stakeholder Partnering Forum. Okay, up next is Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, representative of Texas District 7. I'm here to introduce her as Colonel Timothy Vale.
So I don't say this lightly, but it is a distinct privilege to introduce Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. The Congresswoman represents Texas's 7th congressional district in the greater Houston area, and probably most importantly, as of today, it's located entirely within Harris County. Congresswoman Fletcher has been a resident of Houston and Congressional District 7 nearly all her life, and she was elected to represent the district in 2018, which kind of like from a symbiosis standpoint was just right ahead of me taking command of Galveston District. Prior to her election, she represented Houstonians in the courtroom as a lawyer on a wide range of matters, first at an international law firm headquartered in Houston, and later at a boutique litigation firm where she became its first woman partner. She graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio in 1997, which again, from a nice symbiotic kind of nature, that's when I graduated college, 1997, where she earned highest honors in history and was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. After college, she worked in the business and nonprofit sectors for 6 years before attending William & Mary Law School in Virginia. And at William & Mary, she was the editor-in-chief of the William & Mary Law Review and received the Gambrill Professionalism Award when she graduated in 2006. In the 117th Congress, Congresswoman Fletcher serves on the House Committee on Energy Commerce and on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. But to personalize this a bit, more importantly, Congresswoman Fletcher spent the entire day with me the very first day of my command. So I had taken command, spent the entire day with Congresswoman Fletcher out there on the ground at Addison-Barker Reservoir to develop a deep understanding of Buffalo Bayou watershed together. Both the performance of the dams and the residual risk following Hurricane Harvey and the day in and day out has been a partner coordinating community participation in the solutions for Buffalo Bayou, while also serving as what I consider a mentor to me, taking a personal interest in the development of my listening skills, particularly to the public. And it's been a great joy and pleasure being a partner with Congresswoman Fletcher. With no further ado, Congresswoman Fletcher.
Well, thank you so much, Colonel Vale. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and your remarks were too kind. We have certainly seen the benefit of having you here in the Galveston district, and I've loved the opportunity to work with you and to get to know you and to see the way that you approach these challenges. And of course, it's I think in keeping with how I like to describe our district and our region as really problem solvers and people who come to the problems before us wanting and willing and eager to engage in thinking differently and making things happen. And so it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you, and you will be greatly missed, but you're not gone yet. So we've still lots to talk about. And I'm really glad to be with all of you here today. I know some people are participating remotely. I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad to be with everybody in this room to share kind of an update and a report from Washington, some of the things we're seeing in the Congress this year, and to answer a couple of questions at the end. I think we're going to do a handful of questions that hopefully I'll have answers to, or can take back and ask to the people who may have them. But before I get into some of that, I do want to take a minute to address the moment that we are living in. As we all know, last night, Russia chose to just launch a brutal war against Ukraine, and that's going to have devastating consequences for the people in Ukraine and for the world. And President Putin has really violated the core principles and the order that we have operated under for so many years, and really this sort of peace that we've seen in Europe since the last World War. And so as Americans, I think what we're seeing and what we need to continue to see is that we are united in our opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its assault on a sovereign democratic government. And certainly I support the president and his efforts, and he gave a speech while I was on the way down here about the various response from the United States. But I think it's also really important to note, especially for the people who are here, that Russia's unprovoked aggression reminds us today, as it should every day, of how grateful we are and should be to our men and women in uniform here in the United States who stand ready to defend our country at all times. And so it's particularly fitting, I think, for me to be here with you and with the Army Corps of Engineers that works to protect our community at all times, right? And doing these civil works projects and making sure that we're safe in peacetime and in wartime. And so you're always partnering with us in our community and making sure that we are safe. And I'm just very, very grateful. So I want to thank you all for your service, for your commitment, and for your partnership in keeping our community safe in the ways that we're going to talk about and y'all have been talking about all day. And as I was thinking about coming down here and meeting with y'all and what's happening in Washington, I was just reminded of kind of how effectively and collaboratively we work together in our region with the Corps, with each other. And as a representative from this area going to Washington, I'm always so proud to tell people how well we work together. And I think it really is embodied in the spirit of what we're seeing today. The last few years have shown us how important it is to collaborate at every level of government and in every way to ensure the health and safety and well-being of our communities. So glad to be with y'all for that. And, you know, just thinking about the repeated storms that we have experienced that have brought such damage across our entire region, the pandemic that we are reaching the 2-year anniversary of here at home. It's just really vital that we work together, that we listen to each other, that we understand other perspectives, and that we come together to find solutions. And I really think, I truly believe it when I'm in Washington, that this community can really show the country how it's done. So it's with that in mind that I'm going to share with you a few things from Washington, and like I said, answer a couple of questions. But, you know, part of it is what are the priorities, what's happening in Congress. I know a lot of the challenges that we've been up against with some of the projects that we've been focused on here are very much on the minds of people in Congress as well. And certainly the theme today of environmental and social justice being important to comprehensive coastal resiliency, those are really important issues in Congress right now. Now, the priorities of Congress are generally reflected in its work, and certainly over the last term, we started last January, responding to the COVID pandemic has been top of mind as we continue to fight this pandemic. What you also see coming out of that is how do we do it in a way that's going to lift up our communities, that's going to help us recover our health and safety for the long term. And one of those things is reflected in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I was very grateful to have Byron participating last week as we talked to constituents in the 7th Congressional District about some of the benefits, some of the things that are coming from this new infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill. And that's really important. We've been very focused on infrastructure and on addressing some of the challenges and the longstanding challenges by making this massive infrastructure investment, the largest investment in a century in our infrastructure. So those are really important. As I said before, issues of environmental justice and social justice also very important in this Congress. And so I think that the work you're doing today, the conversations you're having are really vital to how we move forward. And I've been involved in this process since I arrived in Washington, just shortly before Colonel Vail did. And in that session of Congress, actually served on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. But of course, representing the 7th Congressional District, for those of you who haven't memorized all the district lines, I have the Barker and Addicks reservoirs and upstream and downstream portions in the district. I see Elijah from the Energy Corridor District. Certainly, we have seen in our district, as well as in the Braesbio watershed, the incredible challenges when it comes to flooding. So this has been a top priority and stays, even though I've now moved on to the Energy and Commerce Committee. We're still very focused on this and working very closely with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and with the administration on the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And, you know, it's funny, I remember the very first hearing I went to as a member of Congress was on the Infrastructure Committee, and it was on the cost of doing nothing. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from folks this year about whether we should be investing in our infrastructure. And I think it's also important to remind people that there is a cost to doing nothing. So what we want to do is do it right. We want to do it smart. We want to do it efficiently. We want to do it effectively. We want to solve the problems we set out to solve. And the best way to do that is to bring people together who understand the various aspects of the problem and work to address it. And, that means thoughtful investments, right, that really respond to here in Houston, whether it's our continued growth, whether it is preparing us for flooding and extreme weather events, protecting our coastline, strengthening the electric grid. That's also something we're working on in Congress, but really making our infrastructure more resilient, especially along the coast. Those are priorities, as well as focusing on the communities that live there. So we all know the work that the Corps does to increase our resilience to flooding and natural disasters is so important in our whole region. And I'm glad to have worked with many of you and with others to secure aid to allow that to happen from the federal government, and really to help think and prepare for the next storm. So in this Congress, there are a couple of ways that we're going to do that and continue that conversation in a legislative way. First is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but also, as I'm sure everybody here knows, we have WRDA 2022 coming up. And so we've really placed an emphasis, and it's a conversation I've been in Congress since I got there, an emphasis on really developing a holistic approach for risk management that incorporates more than just storm surge, but looking at current and chronic flood risk from sea level rise and precipitation events. There's a lot of talk in Washington, as I'm sure you know, about climate change and the impacts of climate change and how we plan for it, how we assess it, how we calculate it, and what we do about it. So I expect Congress to take a holistic look at modernizing flood management in this year's WRDA bill. And even though I'm not on the committee anymore, we're still pretty actively involved. In fact, I was just chatting with some folks here that our priorities for the WRDA bill are due tomorrow. So if you have anything that you think might not be on the radar, I'll be here after these remarks. But one of the challenges we've seen here in Harris County, certainly, and in the region, is the benefit to cost ratio restrictions and formula that can obviously hurt lower income communities and communities of color when it comes to projects that are going to be built. And so without the ability to justify the cost, as you know, the communities are often overlooked when it comes to flood mitigation. It's my hope that we'll see Congress address many of these issues in the 2022 WRDA bill. And we've also talked about the need to protect local communities as we develop water infrastructure legislation that we have passed, talking about some of the provisions in the bill, the infrastructure bill, all the clean drinking water provisions as well, and making sure that we are looking at water conveyance. So really thinking holistically about how we get to communities. Now, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I mentioned, there is about $17 billion in port infrastructure to help reduce congestion and emissions at ports, and this is also really important. We've heard from a lot of people, as I'm sure y'all have in this room, about some of the challenges around emissions. I actually just introduced a bill a couple of weeks ago now, the CLEAR Act, to help control downstream emissions and do carbon capture at refineries and downstream production. So all kinds of different things moving in Congress to try to help address emissions, but addressing emissions, electrification of certain technologies is another priority in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And like I said, reducing or deploying new low carbon technologies. And that's, designed to help improve quality of life in the areas around the ports or other waterways, and people in proximity to industry. And I think that is going to be a great addition here. We were very pleased to be able to announce the funding that we secured in the first round of funding for Project 11 on the Houston Ship Channel project, the $142 million coming in this first round of funding. So really excited about that. And I think people see and understand the incredible impact that will have on some of the challenges facing the country right now, right? The supply chain delays. Certainly, as we see what's happening around the world, there's a renewed focus on our energy exports and our capacity. And so there are a lot of conversations that are happening in Washington around those issues. And I think that what we're going to see is an investment in port infrastructure that also tries to help reduce the unhealthy impacts that exist for communities neighboring them while enhancing our competitiveness abroad. We have seen a lot of those. I'm sure y'all have personally, many of you involved with the project have seen a lot of local calls for inclusion in those conversations and thinking about these considerations as the port project moves forward. And I think that working collaboratively with the local community will be the key to really advancing these local infrastructure projects as this money continues to roll out for all kinds of projects. It really is a priority of the administration, and it's a priority of the Congress to place an emphasis on equity, on ensuring environmental health issues are prioritized as projects go forward. I think you're going to see that as various grants and other programs to spend the money coming out of the IIJA rollout. Those are going to be priorities. And I know that Congress shares this goal, and I know that y'all do too. So it's just a reminder that that will be an important part of submissions and proposals and work as the administration works to administer the funds. And again, I think here in our community, we do that so well, but we are very aware in Congress of a history of communities getting left behind. And so there's a real emphasis on making sure that we're bringing everybody together. And when we do that, I think we have the most opportunity for success in the long term, getting everybody in on the front end, making sure that all those needs are being heard and then being met. And I think that what we're going to see here is a really rapid distribution of the funds. The port money has already come in. The Regrow Act, which, well, part of the bill was based on the Regrow Act that I wrote to cap emissions at orphan oil and gas wells. That money is already rolling out. The transportation money, all of these pieces, the administration is trying to move very quickly to help our country and our communities individually respond and emerge out of this pandemic in a much, much stronger place. So I think it's important for all of us to continue to work together to identify the projects that are our community's priorities, and then to make it possible by working together, by advocating for those funds. I was very pleased to be able to help play a role in contacting folks in the administration about the importance of funding these projects for our region and the importance of our region to the entire country. I think it's always important as a native Houstonian. Sometimes I think people don't appreciate all of the incredible things that happen here, and how important it is that we tell that story to our neighbors across the country, that they understand that the work that is done here is going to benefit people across the country. But as I said when I started, and I'll sort of wrap up with the same thought, I also think we do it really, really well here by working together. And so that's a great example to be able to point to talk about the port project and say, this is going to move double time, if not faster. And we can point to a successful deployment of these infrastructure funds and to making a real change in people's lives, people who are waiting on things to be shipped from around the world, making sure that we're able to effectively widen and deepen the channel here in Houston to address these issues. You're going to be able to point to that right away because we have a great partnership here that's going to make this project happen as quickly and efficiently as possible. So that's a little bit of kind of how things are in Washington. I think I've probably already gone over my 15 minutes. So I will sort of stop there and go to questions, but I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here with you, to share those insights, and happy to take any questions that you have. Oh, Sean, you're up.
Okay,
Mrs.
great.
Strawbridge.
Great. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. It's great to see you again. I apologize that I'm not there to see you in person, but thank you so much for your participation. And certainly appreciate all that you've done for the Houston region for ports. However, we are truly disappointed that out of $1.2 trillion of infrastructure money in the bipartisan infrastructure program, only $142 million went to coastal navigation projects, and all of that went to Houston, when there are multiple deep draft ports in the state of Texas. Collectively, we handle over 20% of the nation's exports, and not everything moves in a nice, neat 40 by 8 foot container. In fact, Houston's the only major container port in the state of Texas. The rest of us, though, have significant needs. The Port of Corpus Christi, in particular, is the largest gateway for U.S. energy exports from the United States. 58% of all crude oil from the nation moves through the port of Corpus Christi. We have the largest LNG liquefaction facility with one of our customers and your constituent in your district, Cheniere, moving their liquefied natural gas from the Corpus Christi liquefaction facility. And it's clear that this administration, while they have an ambitious environmental agenda, seems to have missed the mark when it comes to exporting U.S. energy to our allies and trading partners, which has not been more highlighted than from the events that we've seen today with Ukraine and now our Western European allies even more dependent on American energy. What can we do as the state of Texas, and how can you in particular, knowing that you have constituents whose money is invested in other ports in Texas, not just Houston, what can we do to really highlight the importance of these other waterways and the need for them to have more funding from the federal government to improve our overall competitiveness and national security when it comes to exporting to our allies and trading partners?
Yeah, thanks so much for your question. And it's a great question. Obviously, not all of the funding has rolled out for the port infrastructure projects. And there will certainly be additional opportunities to apply for that funding. And I know that when I put my toe in the water on some of these issues, there were concerns about making sure that it was equitably distributed across the country, as well as to some of the ports that hadn't received it in the last few years. There were a lot of different challenges, I think. So I think that there will be additional opportunities. And to your strategic question of how do you deal with it, I think that the best thing we can do is, I know I met with you very early on in my first term, and continuing that dialogue with me and my office to make sure that we know the requests that you've submitted, but also helping make sure that we have bipartisan support from our delegation, from all Texans, that we are supporting, whether it is the Coastal Spine Project, whether we are supporting ports across Texas. We certainly know, appreciate, and understand the importance of our energy exports and our energy independence, and that's certainly something that I spend a lot of time talking about now that I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And so I think that continuing to foster an environment where we have bipartisan support for these projects across our delegation is really important. We've done it before, and I think that we'll continue to do that work. And so you're continuing to be in touch with all of us is very, very important in terms of how to make sure that we know what you're asking for, and that we're able to assist in all the ways that we can with letters and other things that are kind of what things happen in Congress. More broadly, I would say in terms of the administration and energy exports, I think that you are right that this horrible circumstance that we find ourselves in today and right now, and that our allies and partners in Europe and around the world who are so dependent on Russian oil and gas are seeing, is the importance of having a secure energy supply and having it among allies and not being dependent on actors like Russia. Certainly, there are challenges that we know in terms of infrastructure, both domestically and in Europe, in terms of being able to receive some of our exports. But there have been calls, I'm sure you have heard, some people concerned about the cost of gasoline suggested that we ban crude oil exports, kind of going back to pre-2015 days so that we could bring down the price of gas. And Congressman Mark Vesey from Fort Worth and I engaged with the administration on that issue, sent the president a letter, have talked with lots of people in the administration about why that is not a good idea, why we shouldn't do that. And I think you see the administration has not done that. Lots of people can make suggestions, lots of people can have ideas, but that is not the policy of the administration. And I think that right now we are seeing the vital importance of our own energy independence and security, first and foremost, but also of the ability for us to help address some of these geopolitical issues by continuing to provide energy of all kinds to our allies and partners around the world, and that how important that has been historically and will continue to be into the future. And so making sure that we have infrastructure for energy exports, making sure that we have the right infrastructure domestically so that, some parts of the country are still receiving, product from Russia. Some are burning fuel oil, which as we talk about our environmental goals, we should be using energy sources that have fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that the natural gas plays a huge part of that. So making sure that they're all, there are tons of levels. I'm sure everyone in this room knows there are tons of levels of this, but making sure that we can get the permits. That was a huge piece of our work in the last Congress, just making sure that PHMSA's regulations were getting issued so that folks knew what they could and couldn't do. There are a lot of moving parts. And whenever I talk to groups that are sort of more energy focused, I'm always reminding them to tell people what they do, because I think our energy infrastructure is so largely unknown and not understood, just because it's incredibly complex and people haven't had to ask a lot of these questions before. So they're asking them now in the context of climate change. They're asking them now in the context of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And there's a real opportunity, I think, to engage and think about how we do all these things together. And you're advocating for energy exports from the Port of Corpus Christi, from Texas, from the United States in general. I think is a really important part of that conversation. So please continue to do it. Oh, I see a question. Yes.
Controversy with the OCS
Yes.
and the federal, you want to expound on that?
Well, let me rephrase. I'm generally familiar and certainly am aware of some of the recent developments on the leasing and the other challenges with the sort of the court opinion versus the administration's steps that they've taken forward. And so I don't have the latest on the administration position in response to the most recent rulings, but certainly we have been very engaged in, a year ago, obviously a little bit more than a year ago, there was a lot of talk about trying to hold back on domestic leasing onshore and offshore. And the administration, again, did not take that approach and did actually what turned out to be, the largest lease in a long time. Obviously, that's now been held up in the courts, and I don't have the latest on how that's going to move forward. But I think it's really important. It kind of goes back to the point I was just making about education. I didn't know before I had this job, but a lot of people have told me that, some of the oil that's produced in the Gulf of Mexico is some of the lowest carbon emissions of any in the world, right? Any that you can find anywhere. And so as we worry about emissions, which is a huge driver in the conversation about climate change, we also want to understand the sources and where we're most likely, where we're best kind of matching our values and our goals and meeting our needs. And I think that's one of the challenges too that we see, is that demand for energy is increasing and will continue to increase. Also, demand that we reduce emissions is really important to addressing climate change. And that is a huge driver in Washington. And you've seen it now coming out in some of the other guidelines, just recently the FERC guidelines that I think were issued last week about anticipating climate change in terms of getting permits and looking way downstream. So there are a lot of opportunities here to engage in that conversation about how do we put all the pieces of the puzzle together and how do we achieve our environmental goals as well as our energy goals. And because no one else had a question, I'm going to sort of wrap up with this thought, which is that I think is one of the most important parts of my job, to go to Washington and say, I'm from the energy capital of the world and we care about the environment too. Right? And we are the people who are here to help solve the problem. We understand it. We understand how not just energy markets work, but how we find it, right? How we move it, what we do with it, how we can come up with alternatives, how we need to continue to use certain sources, what the energy mix does look like, could look like, and how we get sort of from here to there. And when Secretary Granholm was here, I don't know if y'all know, she made her first visit as the Secretary of Energy to Houston, which is of course fitting because this is the energy capital of the world down here. And at the conclusion of the day, what I said to her, and I think is right, and the message that should come from our region is, we here are the partners that you need for the future that you want. Elijah's heard me say this before, because we have this culture of innovation, right? I mean, that is such a part of who we are here in Texas. Culture of innovation, we have the deep expertise in all things energy. And we have the same values and the same desire to move to a world where we're keeping the planet for our children and we're improving it. And I think that message is something that people need to hear from us over and over, because it is not the assumption that people make when I walk in the room and maybe when any of us walk in the room. And I think it's really important for us to continue to talk about our shared values and how we can work together and how we can be partners to really make sure that we are advancing all of our objectives and doing so in a way that's collaborative and that values, kind of going back to the other theme of the day, right? Values the environment, values environmental justice, social justice. How do we bring all of this together to keep our communities safe and to keep our communities and our country thriving?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking your time out to come and discuss our forum topic today on social and environmental justice as it relates to Washington, D.C., the Corps of Engineers, and our local projects. So again, thank you for your time, and you're always welcome. And again, we appreciate and know how busy you are for you to come down to Galveston to make that drive to personally present your message to us. We thank you.
Thanks so much, Byron. I'm glad to be here, and I always love to come to Galveston, so anytime.